Perfect. Thank you. All right, so welcome everybody to our Alternative Berry Production Systems webinar series. My name is Amaya Tucha and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Horticulture and a UW Extension fruit crop specialist. Today, we will be discussing hazelnuts as a new high value crop for the Upper Midwest with Jason Fischbach. And I just want to introduce Jason. He is the emerging crop outreach specialist with UW Extension and has served as a co-leader of the Upper Midwest Hazelnut Development Initiatives since its inception in 2007. Jason manages research plantings across Wisconsin and operates the Umhci Hazelnut Processing Facility in Ashland, Wisconsin. So we're very excited to have Jason giving this webinar to us about hazelnut production. I just want to, go through some housekeeping before we give the microphone to Jason. The first thing is remind everybody, please, to stay unmuted. And if you have any questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat box and we will address them at the end of the presentation. You can also use the Q&A to put some of your questions. And with that, Jason, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and I'm gonna let you start the webinar. And thank you for presenting to us today.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today, what I'm going to do is basically tell you the story of the Upper Midwest Hazelnut Development Initiative, where we're at in this long-term project to create an industry, a hazelnut industry in the Upper Midwest. I'm going to give some, detailed information about establishment and growing hazelnuts, but a lot of sort of context of where we're at, because that's important as you consider whether or not you want to get involved in hazelnuts. Is understanding where the industry is at, what kind of risks you might be taking if you do go down this this path. And hopefully I save plenty of time for questions at the end. We're not messing
Jason,
around.
can I interrupt you? You're not on presentation mode. We can see like your entire presentation, the file. So
interesting.
You can just,
yeah.
It seems that you have the cursor right there. You just need to click to put it in presentation mode.
Yeah, it is. Let's try that again. That better?
No, the same. So maybe if you change the display, because now we can see it's on presenter view. We can see like the part where you have notes.
Yeah, right. So let's try a different approach to get there.
And I'll just put in the chat that we are recording this. So if you want to go back and review or share this webinar with others, we will be putting in the chat our link to our website and also to our YouTube channel for the UW Fruit team, where this recording is going to be available.
So Amaya, I'm in slideshow mode on my presentation mode on my computer. That's how I see it, but it must not be.
No, are you on a dual screen, Jason? Two screens?
Yes.
So that might also, you might need to make sure that your screen share is on the right screen for your presenter or the PowerPoint mode.
Okay.
You might be sharing the other screen. I think you can just, I mean, you can just go back and there we go. Now it's working.
Okay, I think we got it figured out.
Perfect. Yeah.
Sorry about that, everyone. How many of these have I done and never had a problem before? This is kind of ridiculous. We'll figure it out. Okay. I think we're good, right? You should see a slide that says $42 billion. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, it's
So
working.
like I said, apparently we were messing around here, but we're not really messing around when it comes to developing a hazelnut industry. Tree nuts are a $42 billion economy across the world, and Wisconsin participates basically not at all. Same goes for Minnesota and most of the upper Midwest, right? So we're trying to develop a nut crop and a nut industry that has all of its multiplier effects. So that means we're not just talking about, growing a few plants as a hobby in the backyard. We're talking about thousands of acres of production. Most of hazelnuts in the world come from, or I should say in the United States, come from Oregon. They're grown in a very traditional orchard model with European genetics, Corylus avalon, or European hazelnut. They have many, many great cultivars, and pretty much all of them don't work for the upper Midwest. They work at a hobby scale. You'll get some nuts once in a while, but as a reliable crop that can survive all of our winters and can survive Okay, can you hear me now? Looks like someone had muted me.
Yes.
Okay, so generally the Oregon varieties, which you can buy by the boatloads if you want, just are not going to work in the upper Midwest. Boy, the technology today is not working. There are new European varieties coming out of the New Jersey breeding program at Rutgers University. They potentially will be resistant to the Eastern filbert blight in our region, but we have to remember Eastern filbert blight is native to our region. It has many, many different ecotypes, and all of them potentially can overcome the single gene resistance that has been developed for some of the Oregon varieties. Whether or not these developed in New Jersey can survive disease, time will tell. We also have not tested these extensively in our colder regions. So as of now, they're recommended for zones 6 through 7. It's perhaps worth testing, but generally also not likely going to work just because it hasn't been developed for our region. Okay, so in contrast to the Oregon model, what we're talking about in the upper Midwest is a hedgerow system where we're growing these as shrubs and hedgerows, and they're harvested not from the orchard floor when the nuts fall out off the plant, but actually harvested directly from the plant using technology originally developed for blueberries. So those of you that know the small fruit world, this shouldn't be a production system, shouldn't be too foreign to you. The genetic base is also not going to be European hazelnuts, but instead will be American hazelnut. And that's what we tend to see in the progeny or in the parentage of most of this germplasm that's out there right now. This is American hazelnut. Here's a plant that's growing in the wild up in Bayfield County to give you some sense of, it's a short, compact shrub. It will produce lots of nuts in some years, but the nuts tend to be really small and they have thick shells. So as a standalone crop, maybe not. Now, what's interesting is it's an incredibly diverse population across the upper Midwest, and no one's ever really looked through it to any extent to look for high performing plants. We've done some of that work, and we do have a number of accessions in our germplasm trials, but as of now, we don't have a pure American hazelnut cultivars available for growers. If you're looking just to grow hazelnuts at a small scale or as wildlife habitat or conservation plantings, the DNRs of the states do sell these American hazelnut plants. So this is always an option. It's the cheapest option at this point because those seedlings are fairly inexpensive. So what we're trying to do, and breeders have been doing for a long time, is combining the best of both worlds. So we get the winter hardiness and disease resistance from American hazelnut, cross it with American or European hazelnut to get a little larger nut with thinner shells. And this is what we refer to, as the industry refers to, as hybrid hazelnuts. Not true hybrids in the sense of corn hybrids, but interspecific hybrids. So all these blue dots on the map, this is what I refer to as Upper Midwest Hazelnuts 1.0. This originated, all these blue dots are growers that we found back in 2009 when we did some survey work. All of them were growing seedlings from some private breeders that had been selecting their best plants and then saving seed from their best plants. For the most part, the plants were, the parent plants from which the seed were collected were not tested at multiple locations. So if it was a good plant in their orchard, they only had one copy and didn't really know if it was a good plant across the region. Plus, these were seedlings, so every plant's different. There was maybe maybe too much excitement for the potential of the plant material in terms of supporting commercial production. And basically what was found out by these early adopters the hard way is that, yes, there's some really interesting plants in those populations, but on average, they just aren't capable of supporting commercial production. If you look at some data, and I don't have a lot of data in this presentation, but one of the reasons why these seedlings in general, but also the seedlings from these earlier releases were not commercially viable is they're just so variable. If you look at this graph, this shows we give plants a visual yield rating. It's a simple and easy thing we do in August. 0 through 5. 0 means it didn't produce any nuts. 5 would be, wow, that's the most amazing plant I've ever seen. Generally, we would never even bother picking a plant that's lower than a 3 rating. And so this shows the percentage of these different populations that are out there of the plants at age 5 through 9 that had a rating of 3 or higher. So by age 9, these hybrids, a lot of these seedlings at these locations, we're approaching 70–80%, but that means 20 to 30% of your plantings and these seedlings aren't doing anything. And at some sites, it's even lower than that. And by the time you're at age 9, that's just too late. The cash flow doesn't work. You can't sit on no revenue for 9 years, right? So it's too variable and just not high enough producing. So that was Hazelnuts 1.0. We have some, these are sort of small plot evaluation data, but then if we go to actual real life plantings where folks had 4, 5, 6, 7 acres of production, and we run our mechanical harvesters through sort of simulating what the hedgerow model would look like, but using those old seedlings, is our yields just aren't anywhere high enough in shell. And so no one from those blue dots are making money because of the variability of those seedlings. So that's when we got involved, and we sort of knew this from the growers that said, and the growers knew it too, is that, look, we need germplasm improvement. We need better material. And we walked through their plantings and said, wow, you do have some really nice plants here. So that's what we did starting 2007, 8, 9. We found the top plants on those blue dots, if you will, in those plantings, made copies of them through mound layering and established replicated performance trials across the upper Midwest. And as of 2017, we had identified our top 10 out of all of these plantings. So, if we had a plant and it did well at all these sites and produced enough to support commercial production based on our modeling, then we continued it forward through propagation. So here they are, gives you some sense. This, the participatory plant breeding is, to me, such a fascinating thing. It's really fun to think about the progress we've made in that these are named after individual growers. A lot of these, they came from their farms, right? So they participated in this project from the beginning, and now we've got cultivars that will come from them. So here they are. We think they're ready to go. Here's an example of what we've been selecting for: compact, low-growing shrubs that produce lots of nuts every year and that have at least reasonably good kernel quality. The kernel size from these, what we call these first-gen selections, are not as big as the European. And we knew that, right? These are hybrids, so they're going to be somewhere in between. But generally, we're selecting on the larger end of that size spectrum. So you can see generally what we were after. We also want these things to start producing nuts in year 3 or 4, not 9, right? So that we can improve the cash flow on new plantings. So where we're at right now, unfortunately, is we're kind of in this no man's land of waiting for propagation. Hazelnuts are not easy to propagate. It's not like aronia or elderberry where you can do it with stem cuttings. You know, you cut a stem in a bunch of pieces, stick it in the ground, and next year you've got plants. Doesn't work that way, unfortunately, with hazelnuts. We have had decent success with mound layering, but it's a slow process, right? You have to wait for the plant to mature, you cut it down, you might get 10 or 20 copies. And so in order for us to scale the industry, remember, we're starting with one plant, right? That one plant that we thought was good. And we have to try to turn that into thousands and thousands of copies. So that's kind of where we're stuck right now. With mound layering, our first step, we have to be really selective and strategic about how we use this limited plant material starting out. So we've been establishing more trials, trying to get them spread across the region so we can do a couple things. One is make it easier for folks to see these plants in action so they don't have to travel so far. And two is start to find where is the Goldilocks zone for hazelnut production in the upper Midwest with this material. What soil types are ideal, growing conditions, do we need lake effect, all these different parameters that will eventually we'll find sort of the best place to grow hazelnuts. What we have found is that it's widely adapted. We see good nut production is way up in Bayfield. We see good nut production way down by Madison. What's interesting though, is generally we think, well, if you want to be productive farmers, you go down to the southern parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin where the soils are better and the seasons are longer. And that's true, the hazelnuts grow better down here, but they get too big in some cases, right? Especially if we're trying to do straddle over the top harvesting. And so if you look at plantings up by Spooner, where the soils are poorer and the climate or the season is shorter, we get comparable nut production, but the plants don't get as big. And so we may have an opportunity here to have a nut crop that actually works farther north in our states. Okay, so tissue culture is sort of the holy grail of eventually this is how we can rapidly produce more plants. And we've been at this for over a decade. And there have been tissue culture labs across the country that have worked with American hazelnut in the parentage of their plant materials, and they've all struggled. There's a couple things going on. American hazelnut, remember, it's native on our worst sandy soils, and one of their defense mechanisms to drought is just to go dormant. So any sort of disturbance in the propagation process, they tend to just go dormant, and it takes them forever to wake up again, say in tissue culture. The other problem we're running into now are endophytes within the plant material that are contaminating the cultures, and that's wiped out us a couple of times. We had some success, right? We had a taste of success. This is that Eric 421 that we were able to move through tissue culture into rooted micro cuttings and eventually into field ready planting stock. We had about 100 of them, and then those endophytes wiped out the cultures. So again, it just continues to be a challenge with propagation. We're looking to move into stem cuttings now. Stem cuttings have also not proven very effective, but we're looking at a seed grafting method where we take the scion wood, say Eric 421, we graft it onto a newly sprouted seed just long enough so that the buds in that scion won't break, and then we can either root them directly, like we're doing here, to create a plant, or we can use this as a stock plant for juvenile softwood cuttings. So at this point, because we know everybody wants these plants, because we've had these identified since 2017, we're trying everything we can to get these propagated and out to growers. Okay, so let's shift focus a little bit in terms of, okay, given that we're in sort of no man's land and we're waiting for the improved material, I call this stage Hazelnuts 2.0. Where we're still primarily working with seedlings, but we're starting to get ready for the improved material. Here's a new planting that went in up in Ashland this last fall. It's about 3 acres. And to me, it's sort of a model of what Hazelnuts 2.0 looks like. We start with seedlings. We know these seedlings are not commercially viable alone, but these seedlings play some important roles. One, they're a great thing to put in border rows to try to sort of feed the wildlife on the edges, which we'll get to. Hazelnuts do not self-pollinate, and they're not every cultivar is compatible with another. And so by putting out a seedling rows, we've got a diverse pollen not only genetically, but also in terms of the time of year that it's shedding pollen or when in the spring. And so that we're putting in these for a purpose. It's a great opportunity for beginning growers to get experience growing hazelnuts. They're relatively easy to grow, but if you're not new to growing shrubs or trees, there is a learning curve. So better to do that with some cheaper seedlings than with the important new cultivars coming. There's also the reality is, in order for us to be successful long term with hazelnuts in the upper Midwest, we have to be thinking about a breeding pipeline. And no one lab, no one faculty member, no one private enterprise can do breeding alone. The plants, it takes too long for them to grow. You need a lot of space. So continuing this participatory breeding program that we started, in 2008, 2009, will continue. And so when you plant seedlings, you're also participating in that evaluation of that new material and looking for the winning plants. That said, with seedlings, yes, they may not be commercially viable, but you're still going to get a lot of nuts. And if you're doing this on a hobby scale, that's just fine, right? Okay, so you sort of build your planting initially with seedlings strategically. So in a planting like this, every 6th row would be a pollinizer seedling row that's intended as a breeding project. And then we can fill in the rows as cultivars become available. This is what we refer to as a go first farm. And so we're trying to be strategic with where the little bit of propagules that we do have at the top selections go. And so this is intended as a combination research and demonstration farm up in Ashland. And we'll start to deploy more of these go first farms as the material comes available. Okay, so that's sort of our 2.0 model where we're going to be in this phase of some seedlings, some cultivars in these plantings. For 2022, 2023, we have each year we have what's called our UMHDI starter planting program. And this is meant to be sort of a package deal for growers to get started. And we work with our nurseries in the region to provide plant material that we think is worth growers trying for seedlings. Remember, this is just seedlings because the cultivars aren't available for growers yet. So this year we have 3 populations that you can work with. New Forest Farm is a diverse planting of hazelnut germplasm down by Viola, Wisconsin. They save seed from their best plants and sell seedlings for spring planting. We save seed from our very best plants from our breeding program. And Superior View Farm up in Bayfield grows those out as potted seedlings available fall of 2022. And then the Experimental Farm Network is carrying on Phil Rudder and Badger Set Corporation's work by saving seed from their best plants and growing out the seedlings. So we have 3 diverse breeding populations to work with. You're getting seedlings from these. And as a seedling, you have no idea what you're going to get. But in theory, the way plant breeding works is you save the seed from your best plants, and those should be better than just stuff selected at random. Same thing like I talked about, you're not, and this is what we're trying to sort of change the context from what it was for Hazelnuts 1.0. You shouldn't expect to make money growing these seedlings because the yields are too variable and everything. But for all these other reasons is why you would grow seedlings. There is a document that will be on the website shortly that talks more about this starter planting program. This is the cover page to it, and the nurseries that are participating this year with their pricing. So the way to get involved is just go to midwesthazelnuts.org/buy plants, and you can get started. Give you some idea what you might be buying. This is Karen Vanek from Forest Ag Nursery, and these are these beautiful bare root dormant plants that you would get in the spring. And then the Superior View Farm sells these potted plants in the fall. And both systems work great for planting. By the time you plant these in September, they're on their way into dormancy, and these are coming out of dormancy in the spring. So 2 different options. So let's talk a little bit about establishment and production. Again, the upper Midwest, we're growing these as shrubs, and we'd like to see vegetation between the rows. In Oregon, they don't like a lot of vegetation because the nuts fall out of the plants and then they sweep them up off the ground. But that's not a system we're looking at for the upper Midwest. Here is the Ashland planting, just to give you some idea of what we've been doing for establishment. So this is an old alfalfa grass field, and without any herbicide, we came in did a pass with the rototiller, came back with a single shank ripper to break up compaction. We try to get down at least 18 inches with a single shank right down the middle of the row. Then we come back with the rototiller. I mean, this only works if the soils are relatively dry, right? So this is the whole game of establishment. It's all about timing and it's all about your unique circumstances and your unique soils. But just to give you some idea of what we do, we are planting by hand just because we're being really careful, but this, at scale can be done mechanically. For perspective, in Oregon, they're planting thousands of acres with a crew, with the person in front has an auger and a crew behind that throw the plants in the ground. So, this can be done at scale, even with hand labor. We plant about the middle of September. You can see the leaves are still on. They're not fully dormant, but we've still got a good month and a half for these things to go into dormancy. We do use a 24-inch Tubex tree tube to try to protect some of the stem from the winter winds. We may lose some of this top growth depending on the winter, but this is also for any rabbits over the winter. Try to protect that stem for the first year. Cost back last year when we planted is $4.50 a plant. I think the prices have gone up about 50 cents this year. We spend $1.83 between the bamboo and the tube to protect these things. It's going to be more expensive if you're doing small scale, but we generally will take these off either at the fall of, so we planted, this is fall of last year, 2021. We'll take these off toward the end of the summer or early fall in 2022, or depending on how things are looking, we may leave them on through one more winter. But then we can just reuse these on the next expansion of the planting. Okay, so we didn't kill anything in here. We just rototilled it. So we've got all kinds of alfalfa and grass that's going to come back. We do use some herbicide. We'll use spot applications of glyphosate or potentially a pre-emergent. But with the perennials, we have to look at glyphosate. Now, the other option is to try to manage that alfalfa and grass as a cover crop, which is also an option to do. So as with establishing any crop, there's a million different options. We do use a lot of mulch. If you're lucky enough to live in the woods, you've got maybe access to something like this. I'm going to brag about this. We got that whole load for $200. You probably won't be so lucky, but unfortunately we did have to hand apply all that stuff. If you're doing this at scale, you can get a side offloading box to a chopper box to do this for you. But generally mulch helps for any number of reasons. All right, so like I said, there's different ways to establish. Here's a grower that used row cover with wood chips or landscape fabric. That works as well. Once these are established, this is a planting down in Stoughton, and if you look at the planting now, you think, wow, how did this ever get to that point? I mean, the planting is amazing, and there was very little weed control. But the plants got up above the weed line and had these tree tubes that they could mow around it without damaging it, and established well. Generally, you're going to get faster establishment without this level of competition. But again, once the plants are established and up above the herbaceous vegetation, you tend to get okay success. In Oregon, they do a lot of alley cropping. And this is definitely something we recommend because of the delay. Any of you on this call, it sounds like you have some familiar with fruit crop production. You know about the reverse J curve financially, where you invest a lot of money up front and you don't see a return for quite a while. So anything you can do while these plants mature between the rows to make some money is a good idea. Here's roughly what they look like at maturity. This was a 12-foot row spacing, and you can see by about age 6 or 7, they're starting to close in. We generally recommend at this point a 6 foot by 15 foot, so 6 feet in row, 15 feet between row. Some growers are going 3 feet in row spacing with seedlings, and then they just plan to take out the worst seedlings over time to make space for the good ones. You can do that, but just means higher establishment costs. So the plants, in a seedling planting, you're going to look for plants that look really nice, like this. This is Cuddy 228, one of our first gen selections. And here's another plant. Generally, you're going to see they're fully loaded and the branches tend to start to sag because of the crop load. Okay, so these 3 critters, if you're going to grow hazelnuts, you're going to have to deal with these. There's no way around it. And if you're going to plant 2 hazelnut shrubs in your backyard, plan on never getting a hazelnut, because the squirrels and the blue jays are going to steal them before you can get to them. It's just the way it is. Those of you that grow fruit crops, you know how this is. You can't grow one blueberry plant and expect a good crop, right? So in Oregon, they generally expect to lose a lot of nut production on their 2 perimeter border rows from wildlife, right? So there's things we can do to mitigate this. For the deer, it's about site selection. If you're going to plant a 4-acre hazelnut planting in the middle of the woods, a clearing in the woods, you're going to run into problems, right? Versus if you're out in the middle of an open field, you have a little bit less deer pressure. The reality is it's not preferred browse by deer, but they will eat them. They don't tend to chew them to the ground like they would dogwood, but they definitely will browse and set the plants back. So you're looking at perimeter fencing, deer repellent sprays, whatever tricks you've got to try to keep the deer away. Blue jays and the chipmunks and the squirrels, really the only mitigation is don't go on vacation in the fall, because when you come back, the hazelnuts will be gone. So what they tend to leave the hazelnuts alone until they're ripe. And it's really interesting. They will in a seedling planting, because the diversity of maturity is so long in the fall, is that the critters will go from one ripe plant down the line, right? And so what you have to do is, starting late August, start testing for maturity. And as soon as that plant's mature, you need to harvest it. Problem is with seedlings is you can't harvest them too early, because if you harvest them too early, the nuts haven't converted the moisture into oil and protein, and so they shrivel up after you harvest. So you've got to get this timing right. This is one of the hardest lessons for hazelnut growers to learn, in that with these seedling plantings is you've got to be out there picking probably every other day to keep ahead of the critters. Same thing though, once you plant enough, you just don't notice the damage as you would if you had 5 plants in the backyard. Okay. So we've got, talked about plant material, but this is a sort of comprehensive approach to build a brand new industry in the upper Midwest. We don't have nut processing facilities. We don't have markets developed for nuts. So we're trying to do it all and support the growers every step of the way. Because that should be a question you're starting to ask is, okay, the plant material is coming. We've got some seedlings. I could see getting started with this, but where am I going to sell the hazelnuts? So that's what we'll get to here. Okay, so the first step to get to a point where you can sell hazelnuts is you've got to get them harvested efficiently. Hand harvesting works at like an acre level, but it just takes too long. So we're talking mechanical harvesting. So we need to have that capacity in place for growers to have access to. And then once they're cracked, or once you've harvested them, you've got to get them dehusked and you've got to get them cracked and cleaned. So you've got kernel, and now you've got a saleable product. Selling in-shell nuts at like farmers market or to retail establishments can work at a small scale, but how many of you buy in-shell nuts during the year? Right? Probably not at all. Maybe you get some over the holiday season, that's it. So the market for in-shell nuts just really isn't there. You've got to get it to a kernel that you can sell and start to add value to. So we created this accelerator. I see Dave Bonhoff, my collaborator on this project, on the call. He may want to chime in at some point too, especially during Q&A, but the two of us have been working to build out a processing facility that growers can have access to turn in-shell nuts into kernels. Okay, on the harvesting side, generally the existing blueberry or olive or any of these straddle type harvesters work. They certainly can be improved, especially on the handling of the material, right? These were developed generally to harvest soft fruit. And with nuts, we don't need to be so gentle. So there's things we can do on the flow of material through this equipment. But in terms of removing the clusters from the plant, they work just fine. The problem is, when we're doing these seedling orchards, is every plant's different. Every plant is ripe at different times. And so running a harvester down a row doesn't work as well. We are going to have to think about plant architecture, pruning, to make sure that it's working for mechanical harvesting. But I'll just show some of these videos here. This is the Oxbow Harvester. This was a unit that we have down in Madison that we've used. It's fast, it's effective, and it's new. We're talking close to $500,000. So this isn't necessarily ideal for our circumstance. Plus, you can see how big this machine is, and it's heavy. And over time, we're going to end up with compaction. So yes, this machine works. Yes, in theory, you could buy one, but it's probably not optimal. Here's a rotary shaker harvester, a BEI, and similar concept that it straddles the row, and it's just got a different mechanism to knock the nuts off the shrub. And then this is the old classic slapper type. And some of you, maybe if you grow blueberries, probably use something like this right now. So we are currently in the middle of a project where we're taking what we've learned from our various trials and looking to design and build a prototype of one that we feel is ideally suited for hazelnuts. It'll be a pull type unit to try to keep the weight down. And by the time any of you plant hazelnuts, so if you plant 2022, you're going to start harvesting in 2024, 5, we'll be ready for you. But even so, we've got growers using this equipment already. Okay, so we harvest in the husk. So we get clusters that look like this. This came right out of that Oxbow Harvester unit. And now, at least for now, growers are drying this. And if you go to Turkey and see where 70% of the world's hazelnuts are grown, you'd see piles of this all over the place as growers dry these down. And then the co-op comes by with their dehusker, dehusks the hazelnuts, and then takes them to market. So we're doing the same thing right now. And there are do-it-yourself huskers that folks have built. We've imported a couple of these Turkish-made huskers similar to what they're using in Turkey. And then we're also working to come up with a little bit better technology so that we can dehusk these things green and we can skip that dry down step. And ideally, eventually we'll get to a point where that dehusking is happening in the field as part of the harvesting process, where we actually have a hazelnut combine. So this step is, it's not ideal right now that growers are dealing with, but it's working. All right, now you've got in-shell nuts. And this gives you some sense of the size that we're dealing with. So this would be all the nuts that have been received at our processing facility in Ashland that I'll talk about here in a second. Over the last 4 years, gives you some idea of the size distribution of what's being grown. So generally about 13 millimeters. So this is important to know because when we're doing cracking, we have to calibrate the equipment to the size of the nut that we're working with and the shape of the nut and the size and the shape of the kernel. This heavy black line, this is the average nut size of our advanced breeding. So we have our first gen selections, but we're not stopping there. We've made all kinds of crosses and starting to evaluate progeny from those crosses so that the next generation, the second generation of plant material will be even better. So we have put together a processing facility in Ashland that most growers are using. It's a cracker that we brought from Spain, some custom built aspiration equipment and custom built drum sizers, and it's working. You know, we've got the cost to get from an in-shell to a kernel down less than $1 a pound. And so we'll continue to make improvements, but this step used to be a big bottleneck for our industry. But at the scale we're at right now, which is tiny, it's not a bottleneck. We've got tons of capacity even in Ashland, and now we know what to do when it's time to replicate or expand. Give you some sense of how small we are. This is the amount of nuts. This isn't all the nut production in the upper Midwest, but the growers that use the facility, you know, we're 5,000 to 6,000 pounds. We'll probably get close to 7,000 pounds coming in the door this year as it continues to come in. Nice thing about hazelnuts is they do store well. You can, you know, as long as they're dried down, you can store them for well over a year. We try to get the crop processed by March or April of the following spring. Okay, so in terms of marketing, I love this slide. This shows the per capita consumption of various countries, and you can see the USA. So those of you for which the glass is half empty, you say, forget it, I'm not growing hazelnuts, nobody eats hazelnuts. Those of you that see the world through a glass half full, here's a huge opportunity, right? And it turns out that American consumers don't eat hazelnuts because they don't like hazelnuts. It's because they've never eaten hazelnuts. If you go to the store, it's really hard to find hazelnuts. That's partly because most production has been in Turkey and imported Turkish hazelnuts. The quality hasn't necessarily been there. Oregon is expanding like crazy, adding somewhere close to 5,000 acres a year. And so as their production comes up, they will start expanding their reach, their marketing reach. And don't be surprised if you start seeing more ads and exposure regarding hazelnuts. So the economic opportunity is now to try to build off this potential consumption. We're taking a two-step approach, right? So market development is largely contingent on scale. We could go tell you how much hazelnut Mars or General Mills could use, but it doesn't really mean anything because we don't have enough production to even think about supplying a company like that, right? And you as a grower are not going to be selling to General Mills as a, with 3 or 4 acres. So that comes later as we scale up. And then we're talking about large scale ingredient supply for big manufacturers. We're at this scale where grower owned, value added, trying to sell direct, trying to capture as much of that retail margin as we can to try to improve the economics of when everything is so small, we just don't have economies of scale. So the American Hazelnut Company was formed 2014. They're up over 20 members right now, and they account for the vast majority of hazelnut sales in the upper Midwest. Their one product right now, this Hazel Snackers, has caught on, and they're going to sell out of nuts within the first half of the year, right? So all of a sudden, we're out of Midwest hazelnuts, which means that's great. That's what we want. We want demand to exceed supply, and so we need more growers. And we need the improved material out there as soon as we can. That's just one tiny company with one tiny product, right? So as soon as we start to see more supply, we've got opportunities here. Okay, so what are your next steps watching this presentation? One, I would recommend you go to MidwestHazelnuts.org. That's our website, our information portal. Anything you want to know about hazelnuts is on there. We have a Hazelnuts 101 fact sheet series with titles like Establishing Hazelnuts or Can I Grow Money Growing Hazelnuts, all the stuff that you want to know starting out as a beginning grower. Our annual Hazelnut Conference is coming up in a few weeks, March 2nd and through the 5th. The 2nd and 3rd are 2 virtual evening presentations. If you go to our MidwestHazelnuts.org website, you can find the conference agenda. Our in-person conference is the 4th and 5th, which will be in La Crosse. It's the best way to learn about hazelnut opportunity and network with other growers. We have launched, as I'll talk about here in a second, hazelnut grower clusters. So these are clusters of growers, each with a cluster coordinator that are helping with outreach education and to help growers start to work together. Because once we get enough production in a region, then it starts to make sense for those growers to co-own harvesting equipment, processing equipment, or whatever it takes, right? So trying to facilitate that collaboration and information sharing through our clusters. Then you're going to have to decide why you want to grow hazelnuts, right? Are you thinking that you're ready to jump in and do this as a commercial enterprise? Well, then we got to learn all about the risks that are involved, the potential rewards, and come up with a plan. Maybe this is just something you want to do at a hobby scale. All those are great. And then if you've decided to jump in, then consider planting at least on a small scale in 2022 to gain some experience. The only way you're going to learn to do this, right, just like anything, is to get out there and try it. So we try to facilitate that through our starter planting program. So just a bit about the grower networks, because if you are interested at all in hazelnuts, it would be good to get involved. We have 6 clusters scattered across the upper Midwest. Northwest Wisconsin, I'm the facilitator. In central Wisconsin, it's Regina Hirsch with the Center for Integrated Ag Systems. And then we have a sort of the driftless cluster with Savannah Institute, David Bruce. Jeff Jensen coordinates our Iowa growers cluster. And then in Minnesota, we have 2 clusters. The southern part of the state is coordinated by Linda Meschke with Rural Advantage. And the northern part of the state is with Greg Schwesser with UW or Minnesota Extension, RSDP. So to get connected with those folks, just go to our website, click on the Grower Networks tab, and you'll get all the information you need. So with that, my apologies for the technical problems here, but hopefully things went okay, and happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Before we answer any questions, I just want to quickly launch a poll to get some information out of this webinar. And so I'm going to go ahead and just launch it. It's just 4 questions that if you can just go ahead and answer it, that would be great. And then if in the meantime, as you do the poll, you also want to put some of those questions that you have on the chat box, that would be great. So can everybody see? Oh, yeah, there we go. Answering the poll. So one of the questions that we actually have already in the chat is asking, where is funding coming from? So how is all these initiatives are being funded?
Yeah, with the beauty of such a broad collaboration. So we have our primary researchers are in University of Minnesota, University of Wisconsin, and then our nonprofit partners, as you can see on the screen. So we've had funding starting in 2008, I think, and it's primarily all public sector in terms of the federal Specialty Crop Research Initiative Program, the Specialty Crop Multi-State Grant Program. Both states administer specialty crop block grant programs. So we've had any number of grants. Recently, the Savannah Institute, with support from foundations that they work with, have made a big investment in the project. And that's helped launch their Go First farm down in Spring Green and has helped us advance our breeding program. This is the challenge, and with any new crop, is oftentimes in order to compete with funding or to get funding, you have to have an industry. Right, so take the cranberry industry as a cranberry association, and they have some funding that they can work with to invest in research and that kind of thing. Well, with a new crop, you don't have that. We don't have an industry ready to invest or check off dollars or that kind of thing. So it's one reason why we all struggle with developing new crops is finding the funding sources. So we've definitely relied on public investment, and as things move along, though, we're starting to see interest from the private sector, like we did through foundations, and eventually we'll see growers investing. We likely, one thing we've been discussing is, do we go ahead and patent these top plants so that we can commercialize them and collect royalties? Gone back and forth with growers, and eventually has decided that, yeah, that's one way we can fund this project long term, is that growers participate in the project by paying those small royalties for when they buy plants. But we don't, we're not actively selling the top genetics yet because we're still waiting on propagation, but that's another way that we'll fund the project.
Great. We have another question from Tim, and he's asking about pest, disease, and management options. Yes.
So our primary disease is Eastern filbert blight. It's, like I said, it's endemic to and co-evolved with American hazelnut. That's one big reason why we are investing so heavily in the hybrids and in American hazelnut germplasm, is because of the quantitative resistance that comes with that plant material. We see in the hybrid seedlings that are out there, we don't see a lot of EFB. We see a little bit, which is good. That suggests tolerance. And if you go in the wild, you see a little bit, but the plants aren't dying. We don't want to be in a situation where we're using fungicides. The older susceptible material in Oregon, the only way to keep them alive is a steady diet of fungicides, similar to scab-resistant apples, right? You got to put a lot of fungicide out there. So basically, we're trying to maintain that resistance in the wild populations and carry it forth into our domesticated plants. In terms of pests, there's two main ones: weevils, nut weevils. The weevils that attack oak also go after hazelnuts, and big bud mite. We have a doctoral student and professor in Minnesota working on both of those pests, and eventually the goal is to come up with IPM strategies. So the first step is just understanding the life cycles, understand thresholds in terms of damage, and then determine, what are our best, lowest impact options to manage those pests. But those will be the main pests going forward. Japanese beetle, yes, they do skeletonize the leaves. It happens late in the year, and so we tend not to see much damage to mature plantings. For younger plantings, yeah, there likely does need to be some sort of intervention to control the Japanese beetle. Otherwise, they're relatively, at least so far, easy to grow in terms of pest and disease pressures.
So a couple other questions. We have Sonia that's asking, has anyone looked into handheld pneumatic olive shakers for small-scale mechanical harvest? No compaction concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that we have not in our program, I think it's a good idea. There likely is potential there to do it at a smaller scale. There's the problem with the seedlings too is they're all different heights. And so it's just, and there's different detachment forces. So like the machine might work on one plant, but not the other. And so you kind of have to dial in your equipment to the plant that you're harvesting. And because every plant is different in the row right now with seedlings, it just makes it really hard to do that.
Another question here from Gary. Says, thank you, Jason. Are you seeing lower yields or decrease in nuts as the hazelnut shrub age? I have some older plants that have decreased in production.
Yes, we do see that. We also see other plants that continue, the plants get bigger and the nut loads get bigger. This is part of our research project in terms of pruning and rejuvenation of these plants. We're not still exactly sure how to do this. We are learning that every plant or every genotype responds a little bit differently to different pruning techniques. So do we coppice these entirely to the ground? Do we do some renewal pruning where we're taking out the oldest wood? There's also a fertilizer questions on these things. So still lots of unknowns, but generally there is going to have to be some rejuvenation of these plantings over time, similar to the blueberry world or any other crop.
Rachel asked about, I think she's asking about companion crops. Which ones will be best? And could you grow herbal plants for harvest like red clover or oat straw? And I think that is referring to that slide that you showed at the very beginning when you're establishing the hazelnut trees.
Whatever you can come up with that you can grow and sell between the rows while the hazelnuts are growing is a good thing. There is an effort afoot to really think about diversified perennial polyculture in these woody plantings. And so the Savannah Institute has a nice publication out called Growing Tree Crops, I think is what it's called. But if you look Savannah Institute and Google around, you'll find it. But the idea is that you've got an overstory canopy, let's say chestnuts, interspersed with hazelnuts and then also currants built into that system. So lots of unknowns in terms of ability to mechanize, but it's sort of somewhere between a monoculture planting and full-on permaculture. Is can you take some components of each system and combine them into one that's maybe a little bit more workable at scale.
We have one last question here in the chat from Graham. Says, who will operate the harvester? Will it be available to growers?
Yeah, we're still figuring out. So we have those two harvesters sitting down in West Madison, and we have not figured out next steps on those. There's, as Dave and I like to joke, there's like two people on earth that know how to fix and run that Oxbow, so the idea of just letting any growers operate it, it's just too complicated of a machine. But something like the Rotary or the slapper type harvesters are not quite as complicated to operate. So whether or not we let growers use those, we haven't figured out. In terms of developing a prototype pole type harvester, the timeline, the goal is still to have something operational by this fall. We'll see. And it would just be one unit. It likely would just be in our research plantings. And then, if all goes well, we can make more copies for, potentially for people to use in 2023. That's an aggressive timeline. These things always go slower than we think, but that's what we're after.
A follow-up question is, what about the pole type harvester?
Yeah, I think that was Graham asking a kind of extension. So same thing, we're trying to develop that prototype as soon as we can. And then, ideally it's cheap enough that clusters of growers can afford to buy one, even early on where we're at now in our industry's growth, be able to afford those and operate those. The nice thing about a pole type, right, is it doesn't come with the power unit. And so it should be way cheaper. You can just pull it with your own tractor if all goes well.
Well, I think we don't have any more questions in the chat, but I really want to thank you, Jason, for all the information that you presented. It's certainly a very excited time for hazelnuts and the possibility of building up, to continue to build the very small industry that we have here in the Midwest. I don't know if you want to maybe drop your email address or your contact information in the chat if anybody wants to contact you for more information. I'm sharing my screen, and I'm also showing that we will have a couple of other webinars. Then our next webinar is on March 10, and it's going to be about current production. And then on March 31st, we will have another webinar on honeyberry production. And so if you are interested in signing up for those, I'm just going to drop here in the chat our link to our website where you can register for those webinars. And with that, again, thank you, Jason, for presenting today, and thank you everybody for attending.
Thanks, Amaya.